through the rebrand, I think it's interesting because we actually started the process a year and a half ago. And a lot of people in our comments when we did it, I think it was overwhelmingly positive, but still some people who had questioned why. Is it because you wanted it to be American? Is it gentrification? Is it because you have VC money and they're asking you to do it? No, we had talked about doing this even before any fundraising because we wanted to be a broader Chinese food company, not just street food. People questioned why we did it. They were like, hey, Sheltage is much more Chinese. Like, why are you abandoning your roots? And I think the heart of it is those are our roots, but it's not 100% of us.
You're listening to Sunday List, a podcast by To Do. Every episode, we're sitting down with some of our favorite creatives, founders, and entrepreneurs to talk about what they're doing, how they got there, and what they want to tackle next. Today, we're sitting down with Jennifer Liao, co-founder and CEO of MìLà, a direct-to-consumer modern Chinese food company based in Washington. In 2018, Jen left her career in health tech behind to open up a brick-and-mortar restaurant serving street foods she grew up loving and that couldn't easily be found in the Seattle area. A pivot to local deliveries during the pandemic opened up a whole new world of possibilities for the business, which has grown to a viral sensation, shipping more than 10 million dumplings nationwide, and that's setting their sights on grocery store aisles next. Before we get started, if you're looking for an easy way to get organized, look no further. To Do is a thoughtfully constrained, minimalist to-do list app that is as simple as paper. Because we believe simple stays organized. To Do helps you focus on the things you need to get done so you have more time for the things that matter. Start your 30-day free trial at todo.com or download the free mobile app. On to the interview. Welcome back to Sunday List, a podcast by To Do. I'm your host, Evan Leon, and today we're sitting down with Jen Liao, co-founder and CEO of MìLà, a direct-to-consumer modern Chinese food company based in Washington. Jen, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm personally very excited to be talking to you today because MìLà sort of represents two things that I'm pretty passionate about myself, and that's one, growing up third culture, and two, food. In its initial form, MìLà started out as a restaurant.
Yep.
And prior to that, you were working in health tech. And I'm just curious what motivated you to decide, hey, let's start a restaurant.
Yeah. In the beginning, I was working full time at a different job. And it really had started more as a selfish motivation. I really want to eat really great Chinese street food. I miss it and can't find a lot of the items that I grew up with here. And so I had a friend, Norman, he's one of our co-founders. He had asked, hey, do you want to start a poke restaurant together? And I am allergic to fish. So I said no to that one. And then after the first one, he came back and he was like, hey, I still want to work together with you on something. And at first I said, hey, can you open this type of restaurant that has Chinese street food so I can come eat it all the time? And then every week we were getting on these brainstorm calls on how to make it happen. And then after a few months, I'm like, okay, I don't know what happened, but now I'm 100% involved in this. So then we opened the restaurant in 2018. And that was the main motivator for the type of cuisine that we were going for. And then outside of that, from a business perspective, I think I was very interested in just a very different industry, a different type of business, something that I was working on wholly versus, hey, I'm doing one single role and function within a much larger company. And that was on the business development side of things. And this was really expansive across everything and trying to figure it out. So it was also a way to understand myself.
What would you say your relationship with Chinese food specifically was growing up? You said you missed it going down this path. Has it changed your relationship with Chinese food at all?
Yeah. So growing up, my mom actually cooked dinner every single night and it was always Chinese food. So I loved Chinese food growing up. I never really got sick of it. I did request, hey, when we go out to eat, can we not always eat at Chinese restaurants? Can we diversify and try other foods once in a while? But that did happen. And I think I talk about a little bit of this on our website, but there was a pretty definitive lunchbox moment in elementary school where my mom cooked dinner every night. And then for lunch, she would pack me a lunch as well and or bring it to school. And then I was made fun of quite a bit for the food being smelly. And one of the days I threw it in the trash and I came home and my mom was like, wow, you ate all of it today? You never eat all of it. And I was like, yeah, it was so good. So I lied to her. And then she caught me and she was like, your spoon is completely clean. You clearly didn't eat a single bite of it. If you dislike the food that I make you so much, I'm never going to make it for you again for lunch. And she didn't. So then I ended up buying cafeteria lunch food until college. And that's how it was. And I think I definitely started to appreciate it a lot more, even in high school. But then at that point, it was a little bit late on the lunchbox piece of things. But I think even post high school, post college, working, all of that, whenever I came home, my mom would always make these wonderful meals. And whenever people say like, oh, what is your favorite food? Or what would you like to eat? I would always answer my mom's cooking. It's not really a whole cuisine necessarily, but like specifically that because it's so familiar for the types of dishes and the flavors and the taste. And my dad always would say, hey, I would love for you to open a restaurant to my mom. But they're both research scientists in the science and medical field. So there's no way I'm doing that. I like to do it at home for fun, but the restaurant business is super tough. So that was interesting that had happened throughout this time period. And I think opening the restaurant, actually a couple of her recipes are incorporated there. So we have Sichuan cabbage. It's almost like kimchi, but it's not fermented and it has Chinese flavors rather than Korean. And so we have that as one of the side dishes and that's incorporated. So I think that was really nice to be able to incorporate part of my childhood and heritage in that. So I think that actually didn't change my view too much, just opening the restaurant. But I think going into opening the consumer side of the business, then that actually did push us to think about what does this food represent? What are we putting out there? What are the products that we put out there? Why are we putting it out there? What should it look like? How should it taste? How should we sell it? How should we package it? And I think those were forcing functions to really think about like the meaning of the food to us. And even right now, when we're thinking about what products to put out there, it is foods that I would eat myself. So super busy. And it's like the product format, the product flavor, it just starts for me. There's not all of these options out there. There's lots of restaurants in some of the bi-coastal cities, but then it doesn't really exist in conventional grocery stores at all. And so if we ask our audience, what do you want? They actually don't know how to answer that. And it's very hard to come up with a product roadmap based on what consumers are saying they want, which is more American Chinese food. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, that's great. Similarly, grew up with an immigrant mother who is a violin teacher, but also a very incredible home cooked meals every night. And when the responsibility to come up with my own lunches was bestowed upon me, it was like a slice of bologna between two pieces of bread. So I've grown to appreciate it since. So one of the things I was really struck by reading about MìLà, learning about the brand, is that the story of MìLà is like a series of big swings in a way. One, you talked about how you were working in health tech and deciding to open a restaurant, pretty drastic career change. And then two, going from that to changing the business model where it's now this consumer facing brand. It's on shelves in retail spaces or getting more distribution. So when you had just opened the restaurant in 2018, at that point, was that sort of like the end goal? That was the main goal at the time, was just to operate this brick and mortar space. At what point did it evolve into something more?
Yeah, so when we opened the first one, we did think there was a possibility we could expand. But at that point, it was very much, oh, we have one restaurant, we can expand to multiple restaurants. And obviously, Uber, DoorDash, all of Uber Eats, DoorDash, those were getting very popular at that point. And we had contemplated that piece of it around the restaurant itself. So we had started the first one in mind of, oh, this is a beta test. If it goes really well, we could open several other restaurants. But we had never really thought about any of the e-commerce or retail side of things because that's just such a different world. And so during COVID, when we had shut down for a few weeks, our chef had actually started to tinker around with a soup dumpling because that's very close to our hero item in the restaurant. And so for the soup dumpling, we started to freeze it because everyone eats frozen dumplings. So we're like, okay, why wouldn't we do frozen soup dumplings? This kind of also exists in Asian grocery stores, but we don't see any of this out there right now. And so we did our first test there and started very locally, and we just started to expand further and further. And along the way, each step, we just saw more demand than there was supply, which is always a very good sign. So I think we got very lucky with the timing and the product to find product market fit, but also at a time when advertising dollars were very cheap. And so then we were able to do it in a very sustainable, scalable way for the business to be able to expand at that point and take some risks and test it out. So we stumbled upon this perfect product market fit thing at exactly the right time when people are at home and they're seeking food. Because actually buying frozen food online, direct to consumer, is not a typical thing at all. And just generally food online, even if it's non-frozen, is a pretty small market as it is.
For the uninitiated, could you describe what a soup dumpling is? And two, I've seen different techniques of how to properly consume one. Is there a preferred technique that you have, or like a MìLà endorsed soup dumpling consumption?
Yeah, so I think so soup dumplings, first of all, it is like a ball where it's dough on the outside, just like a dumpling. It's a little bit thinner skin than a dumpling. And then inside there's like a pork meatball, and there's also soup. So when you're actually making the soup dumpling, the pork filling is mixed with gelatin, which is how you get the soup in there. And it's solid at temperatures that are lower than warm or hot. And then as you heat it and steam it, that liquefies and the soup comes out, which is why you get that delicious broth in there. The way that I eat it for a larger soup dumpling is I would bite off the top and let the steam vent and then sip some soup and then eat the whole dumpling after getting some vinegar on it. Our soup dumplings are pretty bite-sized. So I think if they come out fresh out the steamer, you definitely still want to bite off a little piece off the top to let the steam vent out so you don't burn your tongue. We see a lot of people just like take it in one go because it's bite-sized, and they definitely are burning themselves because of the hot soup that is inside. But if it's cooled down enough, you can definitely eat it in one bite.
I'm going to have to try that out. I've burned my tongue on a number of occasions.
But maybe that's part of the experience. I don't know.
Yeah. So the soup dumpling, or the xiaolongbao, is the hero product, but MìLà's offerings have grown. You were saying how when you ask the consumer what they want, they're not really sure because this is an open gap in the market. How are the decisions made, or how do you go about deciding what to add next?
Yeah, exactly. Our first item was soup dumplings. Our second item was actually skewers, or lamb skewers, yangzhou chuar. And so we had those last year. And for us, we were really looking at continuing more of this street food trend at that point. So we looked at street food, and then we also looked at what's a summer item that would be good to supplement the product portfolio, because soup dumplings are slightly more seasonal. And I think people think of them as more of a cold weather type of food item since it has hot soup. Although I think everyone eats it at all different temperatures, weathers, climates. But I think naturally that's just the gravitation. So we did skewers next. It's also my favorite street food, which is why we did it. Again, this is selfishly motivated for what products to put out there. And then beyond that, I think for noodles, that was just something that we had started to think about. And we actually were only planning to do dandan noodles at first. So we did a beta test more than a year prior to the actual release. And we did a Washington beta test. Most people actually still did not know what mala spice was, which is like the numbing, tingly spice, which I was surprised by because this was our hometown. This is Seattle. There's a large Asian population. And yet still the vast majority of our customers did not know what that was. And so they were a little bit confused by what they were tasting. And there were lots of requests to remove the spice to make it adjustable or customizable. And unfortunately, the spicy piece is a central core pillar of what dandan mian is. And so I think we really went through asking ourselves, would it be authentic to remove this spice component? And the answer is no, because that's how the dish is meant to be consumed for the type of naengmyeon we were making. I think there's lots of different versions of dandan mian, and some of them are more sesame-based, less spicy. But the one that we were doing, which is a Sichuan version of dandanmian, it has the mala spice to it. So then the solution that we come up with was to release 2 other noodles that were non-spicy that could also have people trying it. So we have a sweet and savory zhajangmian, and then we have a scallion oil noodle, which is a lot more neutral. And so then with this kind of product lineup, then everyone can choose what they want versus compromising on what the dish is.
This interview is brought to you by To Do. You're juggling a lot and you don't know where to start. We've all been there. And that's why we made To Do with the core belief that less is more. To Do is the minimalist to-do list app to ease your cognitive burdens. We are the most refreshing task manager in a sea of monster energy drinks. No pings, no feeds, no comments, just you and the things you need to get done in a simple, intuitive interface. Use code SomedayList for 20% off when you subscribe at TEUXDEUX.com. Back to the interview.
Is there, and I guess you don't have to give too many details if you want to keep your cards close to your chest, but is there like a dream item that you'd love to at least test out with MìLà someday?
There's lots of dream items. I think we've released a beef noodle soup dumpling. A lot of people really liked that. I would love to eat beef noodle soup many times a month. That definitely would be on my list. I think Hainan chicken rice is another one that I personally really love eating. It's a little bit more on the street food theme of things, but I think there's a way to do it very easily with minimal prep potentially. I personally also really like Ru Fan, which is Taiwanese braised pork belly rice. And that is definitely, I would eat that many times as well. So I think my dream items are just delicious Chinese foods, period, but easy prep because I am not a great chef, but I want to eat these foods all the time. And I don't have time to go seek them. So selfishly, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And I feel like other people will appreciate the format as well.
People definitely appreciate the format. I think I read MìLà has sold something like 10 million dumplings. Is that correct?
That was correct at the beginning of the year.
At the beginning? Wow. Okay. But yeah, MìLà is doing incredibly well. The company has grown to 100-ish employees. You just did another big fundraise. You're testing wholesale around the Seattle area, and you're distributing in Costco's in the Bay Area. As I was saying before, you're in all these different avenues. Your background was in health tech prior to this. As a founder, going into each of these new avenues of business, how have you had to grow and adapt? Has there been anything you've been able to rely on from your past? And what have you had to pick up along the way?
That's a good question. I think very little translatable in terms of hard skills, since health tech, like the subject matter is just completely different. And I was doing enterprise sales essentially in health tech with biopharma and tech companies like Apple. So completely different world, totally different investors, totally different product. But I think the things that are carried over are maybe some of the soft skill pieces. So it's like, how do you work together with a team? How do you manage a team? How do you work with peers? How do you construct something where you have a more holistic team where lots of people have different skill sets? And how do you create that type of culture for it to be a high performing culture? I think those are things that are carried over. And then maybe it's the way to look at a problem. How do you use data to analyze the problem? How do you think about it foundationally and drive things forward? So those are things that are carried over, but actual subject matter, very little.
As you said, it's more of a soft skills carryover from any prior knowledge or experience, really. But as you're growing the team, what are the signals you look for when you want to keep pushing yourself in one area or know, like, I might need to delegate or bring someone on that might have this expertise?
Yeah, I think not a super clear-cut answer. One principle to bringing somebody else on is if they can do it better than you. I think a lot of people can do many things better than me, and they have a lot more experience than I do. So I think it is understanding which pieces need to be operated from a first principle standpoint for problem solving. I think Caleb, who's my co-founder and husband as well, both of us are very similar in that we like to go on first principles and think about how would we potentially do this not even thinking about what's already out there and what is the usual way of doing it, or what's the playbook way of doing it, but how would we potentially solve for it from a first principle standpoint. I think that's where we're very strong at. And so then it's figuring out which functions or roles or things that need to be done can be solved this way, or which things need to be done by somebody who has seen it and has completed a playbook or has experience or has subject matter expertise. And you definitely want to round things out in the very beginning on the latter side of things for people you can bring in, and then basically supplementing with first principles problem solving. And as you're building, I think it's less of this role is more predominantly problem solving. This role is more predominantly the function, and more like, how do you bring those together at every single step to make the right decision?
One of the things you just mentioned, one of your co-founders is also your husband, Caleb. Is it hard at all to shut off the work part of your brain when work is quite literally in your home with you?
Definitely. I mean, even outside of work, it's probably 90% of our conversation. But I think that we're also curious about each other, where the work topic is a forcing function of discussion. So it's sometimes obviously operational or execution oriented, like, hey, what do we need to do this? What are the steps? How do we talk through it? All of that. And then actually a good chunk of conversation is like, hey, why did you decide this? Or why are you not deciding this piece? Or why do you think this thing is not important? And even though it is a work conversation, I think that still is a personal, like, getting to know each other piece. It is work, but in a way it's also not.
I guess one of the cool things about MìLà is too that like food is also a way to connect and decompress from work and connect with a significant other. And so all those things are sort of wrapped up in MìLà. One of the things I was curious about, so MìLà has recently gone through a rebrand. The restaurant started out as Xiaochijie, which translates to Street Food Avenue. There was a rebrand to MìLà, and it sort of brought you and Caleb as founders into focus and in a pretty personal way. What has that experience been like? And have you had to like stretch or push your own sort of limits?
So I think even before the rebrand, it definitely was uncomfortable to push ourselves more to the front. I think because we hadn't even personally explored a lot of what our culture and heritage and our upbringing meant to us. We've talked about it and it's been subconscious in a lot of different ways, but we hadn't talked about it explicitly in terms of what it meant to us and how we wanted to talk about it and the way that we wanted to talk about it, which was very important. And I think for us, we wanted it to be very inclusive because that's how we felt, was like we didn't have the answers. We don't know as much as a lot of very active voices out there, which have led the way, which I think we really appreciate. And so for us being on this journey, how did we maintain genuine? How were we genuine about it? Which is we don't know everything, and maybe that's okay. And we can be lenient with ourselves for not knowing everything. And it's at least good that we're exploring it now. And there's probably other people out there that are on that same journey and path. And so then they can see another voice that also doesn't really know what is going on or how they feel. So that's how we decided to approach it even before the rebrand, and to talk through why this was important to us, because it was clear that it was more important than other things we had done, but we didn't really know why yet. Through the rebrand, I think it's interesting because we actually started the process 1.5 years ago. And a lot of people in our comments when we did it, I think it was overwhelmingly positive, but still some people who had questioned why. Is it because you wanted it to be American? Is it gentrification? Is it because you have VC money and they're asking you to do it? No, like we had talked about doing this even before any fundraising because we wanted to be a broader Chinese food company, not just street food. And we wanted it to represent all parts of us. And so MìLà was actually going to, like, if we had a daughter, we ended up having a son, we would have named her MìLà. And then when we knew it was going to be a son, it felt like this name could really fit our company. And we wanted to name our daughter MìLà for very similar reasons, which is it's both a Chinese two words and also an English word. So it has that duality piece to it. It is spicy and sweet, and it could be both of those, neither of those, anywhere in between. And like this person or company could be that and choose to be whatever it wanted. And that felt very good to us and why we chose it. And I think when people questioned why we did it, they were like, hey, Sheltage is much more Chinese. Like, why are you abandoning your roots? And I think the heart of it is those are our roots, but it's not 100% of us, right? Like we are Chinese and that's where we come from. And that's the third culture piece that you talked about is this is where we started and it's incorporated into it, but it's not 100% of who we are. We've evolved from that. There's lots of other influences. There's a lot of evolved thinking and evolved tastes, and we want that to be part of the story. And this is a starting point. So that's exactly how we wanted it to be reflected.
My brother had actually put me on to MìLà. Before we had set up this interview, he texted me, hey, you should check out this company, MìLà. My friend Caleb founded it. And so I looked at it, I looked at the website, and then I was like, this is really reminding me, like, I swear I've seen a Facebook ad for a soup dumpling brand on Instagram before, but it was called something else. And then like I go to your website, and I was like, oh, it was Xiaochuji. I was like, it was MìLà prior to the rebrand. The other thing I wanted to say was, as a third culture adult now, I really appreciate that MìLà has the pinging in the logo itself. It's really helpful for me, who is pretty rusty on my Mandarin. But as far as the rebrand goes, you've also now brought on famous Marvel actor Simu Liu as Chief Creative Officer. What has that enabled in how MìLà tells its story?
Yeah, so I think Simu joining us is really great because I think we can expand the way that we talk about things. I think there's a way to reach people in a very different way. So there's different audiences that are reached. There are different people that you can bring to the table to shine a light on what's going on as well, and Chinese food and Chinese culture. And I think that was what was really important to us. So it's just another voice that can tell a similar story, a different story, and bring other people into the fold. That's the same thing. Like we want to invite people to the table to talk about it, even if they aren't Chinese or Chinese American, or maybe don't have experience with it. Like, how can we get them to think about it and welcome it and embrace it? I think that's really the point.
So we've talked about how the business has gotten to this point. MìLà is growing, distributing in more places across the US. When you zoom out of the day-to-day operations of the business, or even maybe week to week, quarter to quarter, when you zoom out on a high level, what would you like to see MìLà achieve? And what would you like maybe your or MìLà's legacy to be in the broader conversation?
When we first started, as I mentioned, it was just to have really great food. And I think as we've gone, we've encountered a lot of things that we weren't aware of necessarily. So I think a lot of suppliers and vendors and infrastructure has evolved very differently for like ethnic grocery stores versus conventional grocery stores. And there's little crossover in the way that they're set up because the certifications, regulations, the things that are talked about or marketed are also completely different. And I think we want to be able to bridge that a little bit and basically evolve the infrastructure in a way that makes it a lot easier for other people to also create this food and try this food. I think that's the main goal as we go. And so I think it'd be just really cool to have lots of different Chinese food options available to different people, and they get to try all this different food.
I'm really excited. Soup dumplings are pretty hard to come by in the Midwest where I am, so I can't wait to try them. Jen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can we find MìLà online?
You can go to our website, which is www.eatmila.com.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Someday List. For more interviews, you can follow the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow along at To-Do app on Instagram and TikTok, or at To-Do on Twitter. If you want to learn more about today's guest, check out their website, eatmila.com. That's eatmila.com. This podcast is produced by To-Do. Our theme music is composed by Evan Laybourne. I want to thank our guest, Jen, for being on the show again. And of course, thank you, the listener. We'll catch you next time.